Greetings, my humble subject is Fyron here. Welcome back to the channel. So it's another one of those videos where I rant about games I like, and today the game in question is Assassin's Creed 3. Now it's like a one true love for me because Assassin's Creed 3 was the game that made me enter the franchise in the first place. I didn't play AC1 or AC2 before that. I knew about the games, but I never had the chance to play it. So when AC3 came out, I jumped into it and played it, and I absolutely love it. I mean, the story, the characters, the plot twist in between. I mean, the charismatic nature of Hatham, the brute nature of Connor. It's an incredible mixture of things. I mean, Connor is like the Chuck Norris of Assassin's Creed universe, in my opinion. I mean, he can take out armies on himself. Like, it's so easy for him to do. So I just wanted to talk about how the game came to be, what's the good thing about it, and should it be playable in 2026? So let's jump into the video. So, Assassin's Creed 3. Yeah, this is probably one of the most divisive game in the entire franchise. Ask 10 AC fans and they would tell you 10 completely different opinions. Some people would absolutely love it, while others think it's one of the weakest entries Ubisoft has ever made. And honestly, I can understand both sides. Coming after the legendary Ezio trilogy was never going to be easy. Ezio had become one of the most beloved protagonists in gaming, and replacing him was basically an impossible task. But instead of trying to make another Ezio, AC3 went in completely different direction. It gave us a new setting, a new protagonist, a different direction, different location, a new combat system, a new parkour mechanic, and even a brand new engine. Ubisoft wasn't playing it safe. They practically rebuilt the series from the ground up. And while not every experiment landed perfectly, I genuinely think AC3 deserves way more appreciation than it gets. It's messy, sure, but it's also ambitious, and like the storyline is amazing for it. And at times it's absolutely brilliant. So today, let's go back to colonial America and find out whether AC3 was actually underrated or people were right to criticize it. So the story begins in a way that nobody expected. Instead of immediately playing as Connor, we are introduced to Hatham Kenway, a sophisticated, intelligent, and incredibly charismatic gentleman arriving in Boston in 1754. Right from the start, Hatham gives off main character energy. I mean, he's calm, confident, honestly feels like the coolest person in every room. We spent several hours playing as him, recruiting allies, uncovering conspiracies, and hunting down mysterious artifacts. Everything feels like a classic AC game. Naturally, most players assumed Hatham was the new assassin protagonist, but then Ubisoft pulls one of the biggest plot twists in franchise history. Hatham isn't an assassin at all. He's a Templar. Looking back now, it's one of the boldest introductions in the series because it completely changes how you see the conflict between assassins and Templars. Instead of painting the picture as black and white, instead of painting one side as purely good and the other as purely evil, AC3 starts asking uncomfortable questions. Are the Templars always wrong? Are the assassins always right? That moral grey area becomes one of the game's greatest strengths. So, Hatham's mission eventually lead him to Canetio.
Canetio.
Okay, I'll just call her Zio for short as it does in the game. Okay, she is a strong and independent Mohawk woman whose village is caught in middle of colonial expansion. Their relationship eventually leads to the birth of Raton Haketun, better known as Connor Kenway. Connor grows up witnessing the destruction of his people and the constant threat posed by expanding colonial settlements. Then tragedy strikes when his village is attacked and his mother dies in devastating fire. This moment shapes Connor's entire life. Unlike Ezio, whose journey begins with revenge before evolving into something greater, Connor starts with a much broader purpose. He wants to protect his people, preserve their homeland, and stop the chaos consuming America. That motivation feels unique within the series because Connor never really fights for glory or personal fame. He fights because he believes it's the right thing to do. This is also where AC3 introduces Achilles Davenport, one of the last surviving assassins in colonial America. As you might be aware, in the Rogue gameplay, we met Achilles and Shay almost destroyed the colonial brotherhood in its entirety. At first, Achilles was completely given up. The brotherhood has been destroyed, his friends are gone, and he sees no reason to continue the fight. Connor's determination slowly reignites the spark. Watching their relationship develop is honestly one of the most underrated parts of the story. Achilles isn't the fleshy mentor that Mario or Yusuf were. He's old, tired, sarcastic, and brutally honest. But over time, he became a father figure for Connor. teaching him not only to fight but also how to think. Their conversations are some of the strongest character moments in the game because neither of them always agrees with the another. Instead, they challenge each other's beliefs. Now let's talk about Connor himself, because this is where opinions become incredibly divided. Connor is nothing like Ezio, and that's exactly why so many players struggle to connect with him. Ezio was charming, funny, flirtatious, and always had something witty to say. Connor, on the other hand, is like serious, quiet, determined, and emotionally reserved. Some players call him boring, but I honestly think that's a bit unfair. Connor isn't emotionless, he's simply carrying the weight of an entire culture that's slowly disappearing. His anger isn't directed at one person, it comes from watching his people lose everything. That makes him a much more tragic protagonist than people often give him credit for. He believes people can change, he believes justice is possible, and throughout the game, those ideals are constantly tested. One of the coolest things about AC3 is how it weaves Connor into real historical events. Instead of simply watching history unfold from the sidelines, Connor becomes directly involved in the American Revolution. He meets George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Samuel Adams, Charles Lee, and many other famous figures. Sometimes these interactions feel a little forced, but for the most part, Ubisoft does a fantastic job making Connor feel like an unseen participant in history, rather than the person responsible for everything. The Battle of Bunker Hill remains one of the franchise's most memorable missions. Running through an active battlefield with cannonballs exploding around you still feels incredible, like it's so cinematic even today. It perfectly captures the chaos of 18th century warfare while reminding you that Connor is just a man trying to survive in the middle of history. Of course, the story isn't perfect. The pacing has always been one of the game's biggest criticism, and honestly, I agree. The introduction takes a very long time before you finally become Connor. By modern standards, several hours of setup before reaching the main character feels excessive. The game also introduces mechanics very slowly, almost like it's afraid to overwhelm new players. While that approach helps newcomers, returning fans often felt frustrated waiting for the game to truly begin. Once everything opens up though, the experience becomes much more engaging. In my opinion, AC3 really shines in its combat. Ubisoft completely redesigned the fighting system, making Connor feel like an unstoppable force of nature. Gone were the slower duels of previous games. Connor fights with brutal efficiency, changing counters, dodge, disarms and execution into incredibly satisfying combos. Watching him seamlessly switch between a tomahawk, sword, hidden blade, pistols, muskets and rope darts make every encounter feel like an action movie. The animations were still some of the best in the entire franchise. They are fast, they are fluid and surprisingly violent without never feeling excessive. Every execution has weight and every weapon feels distinct. Even today, few Assassin's Creed games make combat feel such impactful. Now let's talk about something that AC3 absolutely nailed, the world itself. Ubisoft chose one of the most unique settings in the game at the time, colonial America, during the American Revolution. Instead of giant Renaissance cities packed with skyscraper-like buildings, we got Boston, New York, and the massive frontier. And I remember when people first saw this setting, they were like, wait, where am I supposed to do parkour in this? Because let's be honest, compared to Florence and Constantinople, these cities looked short. They weren't giant cathedrals everywhere, they weren't huge towers every 5 minutes, but Ubisoft had already thought about that. This is where they introduced one of the coolest traversal mechanics the franchise had ever seen, tree running. And honestly, I still miss it. Watching Connor sprint across these branches, leap between trees, swing over rivers and seamlessly continue this movement without touching the ground made the frontier felt alive. It wasn't just a forest, it became your personal playground. Suddenly chasing enemies through the wilderness was just as fun as climbing rooftops. It added verticality to nature in a way that very few games have managed since. And speaking of movement, Connor himself just feels athletic. Every animation has this sense of weight and speed. He vaults over fences, slides under obstacles, jumps through windows and climbs cliffs with an energy that fits his character perfectly. The animation were built from scratch and it really shows. Even small details like the way he pushes civilians aside while running or plants his stomach into the ground to stabilize himself on steep terrain make him feel like a real person instead of just another video game character. Sure, some of the parkour control can be a little frustrating by today's standards. You'll definitely have moments where Connor decides the window next to you is far more interesting than the rooftop you're trying to reach, but when everything works, it feels incredible cinematic. Now let's talk about the frontier, because this area deserves way more appreciation than it usually gets. This wasn't just empty land connecting two cities. It was packed with wildlife, hidden caves, rivers, hunting grounds, military patrols, bandit camps, and dozens of little secrets waiting to be discovered. The dynamic weather made everything even better. Running through a snowy forest during a blizzard while chasing a target genuinely felt immersive. Then, a few in game months later, you'd return to the exact same place and it would be covered in green grass and bright sunlight. Seasonal changes might seem normal today, but back in 2012, this was seriously impressive. And then there's hunting. Now, depending on who you ask, this was either an amazing addition or an annoying distraction. Personally, I loved it. Connor is part of the Mohawk Nation, so hunting isn't just some random side activity Ubisoft threw into the game. It actually fits with his background. You can track deers, wolves, foxes, and a lot more other creatures. Basically, if it moves, Connor probably has a way to hunt it. Different weapons give different quality pelts, meaning you can't just throw a grenade. I mean, imagine if Assassin's Creed had grenades. But you get the idea. If you damage the animal too much, the pelt loses its value. It added a surprising amount of strategy to what could have been a simple collectible system. Plus, let's be honest, getting chased by an angry bear in AC is still terrifying. The hunting system also ties directly into crafting, which is another mechanic people often overlook. Throughout your adventure, you can gather resources, collect pelts, and use them to craft better equipment or trade goods. It gives exploration an actual purpose beyond ticking icons of a map. You're constantly rewarded for taking the long route instead of fast traveling everywhere. It's one of those systems that quietly encourages immersion without forcing you into it. Now, one of the biggest surprises in AC3 has to be the homestead missions. And if you skipped these, congratulations. You accidentally missed some of the best content in the entire game. Seriously, while the main story focuses on war, politics, and revenge, the homestead is where Connor actually becomes human. Instead of being this constantly serious warrior, you get to see him helping ordinary people build new lives. You recruit farmers, blacksmiths, hunters, tailors, and so many more. And you slowly transform Devonport Homestead into a lovely mansion, into a thriving community. And what's really cool is that every single resident has their own personality and a little story arc. Connor helps settle arguments, reunite families, defend people from criminals, and solve everyday problems. These aren't world-ending missions, but they give Connor a warmth that the main story sometimes doesn't have enough time to show. By the end of the game, the homestead genuinely feels like home, and that emotional payoff is incredibly satisfying. Another feature that deserves a huge shout out is naval gameplay. Now remember, this came before Black Flag. Ubisoft could have easily kept everything on land, but instead they experimented with the ship combat. Connor takes command of the Aquila, and these missions were honestly some of the most exciting missions in the game at the time. Sailing through massive storms while waves crash over the deck, firing broadsides into enemy ships, dodging incoming cannonballs, it feels incredible. The ocean physics were genuinely impressive for the time. Your ship rocks violently during rough weather, visibility drops during storms, and every battle feels unpredictable. Looking back now, you can clearly see Ubisoft testing ideas that would later evolve into one of the greatest pirate games ever made. Without AC3 experimenting with naval combat, there's a good chance Black Flag wouldn't have come and wouldn't have become the masterpiece we know today. Of course, naval gameplay isn't deep here, as it would eventually become. There are endless customization options and use free to commands, but for the first attempt, it's remarkably polished. Every mission feels unique, whether you're escorting allied ships, chasing smugglers, or engaging entire British fleets. Honestly, when these missions popped, I was excited because they broke up the pacing perfectly. Now let's talk about the presentation, because Ubisoft really pushed their new engine to its limits. Character models were significantly more detailed than the Ezio games. Facial animations improved dramatically, clothing reacted naturally while running, snow left footprints behind, trees swayed dynamically in the wind, and crowd behaved much more realistically. Sure, some animations look a little dated now, but considering this was released in 2012, it was a massive technical leap. Even today, there are moments where the lighting and environmental effects still look surprisingly beautiful. And then there's the soundtrack. Wow. I mean, Assassin's Creed has always had fantastic music, but AC3 score perfectly capture both hope and tragedy. During exploration, the music feels peaceful and adventurous. During battles, it becomes tense and heroic. And in emotional moments, it quietly reminds you that this isn't just a story about winning a revolution. It's also a story about everything Connor loses along the way. There are tracks that still give longtime fans goosebumps because they are so perfectly tied to the game's biggest moments. One of the things people don't always appreciate is how much attention was given to the atmosphere. You hear blacksmiths hammering metal, soldiers marching through towns, children playing in the streets, birds singing in the forest, rivers flowing naturally, and distance cannon firing during wartime. It creates an incredibly believable world that feels alive even when you're doing nothing. I just stop and on a rooftop and watch the world go by because Ubisoft had put so much detail into making colonial America feel authentic. Now, before we wrap everything up, we have to talk about the side content because AC3 has an absolute mountain of things to do outside the main story. Some of it's fantastic and some of it definitely feels like Ubisoft look at the map and said, you know what, let's add another 100 collectibles. You've got feathers, you've got trinkets, you've got underground tunnels, and force to liberate, delivery missions, naval contracts, courier assignments, hunting challenges. I mean, assassin recruitments, encyclopedia pages, and enough map icons to make a completionist question their life choices. If you're the kind of player who wants the beautiful 100% completion screen, you're going to be spending a lot of time here. The good news is that a lot of these activities actually reward you with useful upgrades or interesting lore instead of just giving you a trophy and sending you on your way. Liberating forts is especially satisfying because each one feels like a miniature battlefield. Sneaking in quietly is an option, but let's be honest, most of us ended up sprinting through the front gate with a tomahawk like Connor had absolutely zero concern for self-preservation. Speaking of stealth, this is probably one of AC3's most mixed mechanics. Ubisoft introduced several new features that sounded amazing on paper. Connor can hide behind trees, you can blend in bushes, use tall grasses to stay hidden, and stalk enemies through the wilderness like an actual hunter. In forests, these mechanics work brilliantly. Sneaking through the trees while silently eliminating redcoats one by one feels incredibly satisfying. But once you move into the cities, the stealth becomes a bit inconsistent. Enemy detection can sometimes feel unpredictable. Guards occasionally spot you from what feels like another postcode, while other times you can practically walk past them without anyone noticing. There are moments where the AI makes you feel like the greatest assassin who ever lived, and moments where you'll get detected for reasons that even the animals probably can't explain. It's not bad by any means, but it's definitely rough around the edges. One of the features that deserve more appreciation is the assassin recruit system. Just like in Brotherhood and Revelation, Connor can recruit new assassins to help during missions. But instead of simply sending them on contracts, each recruit has a unique backstory and joins the Brotherhood after Connor helps them overcome personal struggles. Whether it's freeing someone from oppression or helping them seek justice, these missions make recruiting feel more meaningful rather than just unlocking another gameplay mechanic. It's a shame the system isn't expanded even further because it has so much potential. Now let's shift gears and talk about the modern day storyline because this is where AC3 carried an enormous responsibility. For years, players had been following Desmond Miles. Every game had slowly built towards one massive conclusion, and this was finally supposed to answer the biggest mystery of the franchise. Throughout the game, Desmond leaves the Animus several times to explore modern day locations, solve puzzles, and continue to search for the first civilization's secrets. Unlike previous games where the present day section were relatively short, AC3 actually lets you play full missions as Desmond, including climbing skyscrapers, infiltrating secure facilities, and even taking part in some surprisingly fun action sequences. Seeing Desmond finally become the assassin he had been training to become felt incredibly rewarding after all the years of build-up. Then we have one of the strongest relationships in the game, Connor and Hatham. Honestly, this father-son dynamic completely steals the show. Whenever they're together, Hatham is calm, intelligent, manipulative, and genuinely believes the Templars are the only path to peace. Connor, on the other hand, is driven by hope and refuses to believe that freedom should come at the cost of control. Neither of them is completely right, and neither of them is completely wrong. That's what makes their conversation so fascinating. Instead of simply fighting because they are on opposite sides, they constantly challenge each other's belief. These are moments where you almost wish they could work together permanently because their chemistry is so good. Hatham isn't your typical villain. He is charismatic enough at times that you actually understand his perspective. The moral conflict adds so much depth to the story. Then there's Charles Lee. Now, compared to the villains like Caesar Borgia or Rodrigo, Charles Lee is a much quieter antagonist. He's less theatrical and more calculative. Throughout the story, Connor's pursuit of Lee becomes deeply personal, especially after everything that happened to his family and village. But what really stands out is the final confrontation. After all the battles, betrayals, and years of conflict, the game doesn't end with an over-the-top cinematic boss fight. Instead, Connor tracks down a wounded Lee And these two simply sit across from each other in a tavern, sharing one final drink before Connor delivers the killing blow with his hidden blade. It's strangely peaceful. There's no dramatic speech, no celebration, just two exhausted men whose lives have been consumed by a conflict that neither truly escaped. It's one of the most memorable ending in the franchise because of how restrained it is. And then the ending of the modern day story. Without diving too deep into the spoilers for anyone somehow still hasn't experienced it, AC3 took a massive risk with Desmond's journey. Ubisoft clearly wanted to conclude one chapter of the franchise while opening another. Some fans loved the bold direction, while others felt disappointed after years of anticipation. Regardless of where you stand, it's impossible to deny that ending changed AC forever. The series would never be the same after this point. Now let's answer the big question. Is AC3 actually a good game? In my opinion, absolutely yes. Is it perfect? Not even close. The pacing is slow. The opening takes too long before giving players freedom. Some missions rely heavily on strict optional objectives that can become frustrating. The stealth AI occasionally has a mind of its own, and Connor's personality isn't as immediately charming as Ezio. These are valid criticisms, and they haven't magically disappeared with time. But here's the thing, AC3 also does so many things that are exceptionally well. The combat is still among the best, I believe, in the series. The animation remains some of Ubisoft's finest work. The parkour during the tree running is also fantastic. The introduction of Homestead is like really good. The soundtrack is amazing, and I personally believe like the story and the way Connor has progressed, the relation of him and Hatham, and how the story like just progresses, it's an amazing thing. Most importantly, the game wasn't afraid to take risks. Instead of copying the Ezio formula for the fourth time, Ubisoft tried something completely different. Not every experiment worked, but I'd much rather play an ambitious game with flaws than a safe game that plays everything by the numbers. Interestingly, the community's opinion hasn't changed a lot over the years. When AC3 first launched, expectations were almost impossible to satisfy because everyone wanted another Ezio. But now, after experiencing so many Assassin's Creed games in a different setting altogether, people have started looking back at Connor's journey with a fresh eye. It's become one of those games that has aged much better than its initial reputation suggested. If you are playing the remastered version today, you'll also benefit from improved lighting, updated textures, smoother performance, and a quality of life improvement that makes revisiting the game even more enjoyable. While it doesn't completely fix every issue, it definitely provides the best way to experience Connor's adventure. So, after replaying Assassin's Creed 3 all these years later, I'd say this, it may never reach the universal love that Assassin's Creed 2 or Black Flag enjoys, but it absolutely deserves more respect than it often gets. It's a bold, emotional, and ambitious chapter that dared to reinvent the series when it could have played it safe. Connor may not be the loudest or funniest assassin, but he's one of the most tragic and sincere. His story isn't about becoming a legend, it's about fighting for people who may never remember your name. And honestly, that's a pretty powerful message. If you have been avoiding AC3 because you heard it's bad once, I genuinely recommend you to try it. You might end up discovering one of the franchise's most underrated adventures. So that's it for the video. That were my thoughts on Assassin's Creed 3. And if you enjoy this kind of content of me ranting about games and all, do let me know in the comments of what other games I can do. And I'll be doing a lot of live streams also because we have started with Assassin's Creed 3 because I posted it on YouTube and you guys showed a lot of love that AC3 should be played next. So we'll start with that. And as always, stay hot.